What's up, YouTube? So UVI Falcon 2 just came out, and if you didn't know, I'm quite a big fan of UVI Falcon. It's an incredibly vast sound design tool that incorporates sampling, synthesis, and pretty much all of the sound design tools that you could possibly ever need into a very easy to use interface. It's a little bit deep for most everyday electronic music tasks, but it's got some really special things, and I think specifically with some of the new additions, it might become a little bit more popular. So let's dive in and have a look. So one of the biggest new additions in UVI Falcon 2 is the new Additive Oscillator. I've explained the idea of additive synthesis a few times. It's essentially building up a complete waveform using the individual partials. And the cool thing about this Additive Oscillator is it works a little bit differently to how I've explained other ones before, where you're kind of just building the partials, whereas this gives you live control over what these partials are doing. For example, dissonance spreads the partials out or sort of moves them closer together to create a kind of either inharmonic or slightly more harmonic sound. So the cool thing is here is, often with subtractive synthesis, you're using effects and all sorts of stuff to add in harmonics. And if that tone isn't specifically there in the frequency range, all you're doing is, maybe adding a bit of noise and, resonant tones and stuff like that. Whereas with traditional additive synthesis, you get a much cleaner sound, so you can create these kind of pads and atmospheric and pluck type of stuff that, sounds much richer and then, for example, with a subtractive synthesis. And obviously, the cool thing about Falcon is you've obviously got the subtractive synthesis tools at your disposal as well. So you can then route it through a filter and effects and all sorts of stuff after you've created this kind of rich sound already. But that being said, you don't necessarily need to. It's got a filter here which essentially applies, what a filter normally applies, but it just removes those specific harmonics. Similar to Dimitri Chess Thorn, that harmonic filter. So this kind of is built into the additive oscillator. I'm just going to play around with this a little bit and see what kind of unique sounds we can come up with. So for example, using this kind of max partials setting over here, you don't have the roll-off that a filter has. So you can do things that traditional subtractive synthesis can't do. There's obviously various other settings here, but the cool thing about this is you've got this live readout of what exactly is going on with the partials. So for example, dissonance, you probably know what that means, the actual word itself. That's going to spread these kind of harmonics out a little bit. So say, for example, if this first fundamental is a C, this is going to be slightly shifted off from the C and create this kind of dissonant sound. So you notice how that individual fundamental frequency stays the same, and you've just got control over the kind of frequency of each of those waveforms as opposed to the actual pitch of the sound itself. So that's a very, very interesting control for kind of more, experimental, robotic kind of sounds. So just using these kind of like additive controls, you've got incredible control over the sonic characteristics of just that single source, of just that single sound, which is really, really cool. You know, like I said, you don't necessarily need to apply further effects and stuff like that, but you can. So here what you can also do is you can shift, I'm going to dial that in exactly, let's say 24 semitones, so that the, you know, bass frequency is 2 octaves higher than what it's supposed to be. And then when you play with like these dissonance and stuff, it gets even more interesting. So of course you could apply, for example, like an LFO. Let's just add modulations. New LFO. We don't want it sweeping too much, so let's just adjust these a little bit. And then we can set this filter, let's say to like a high pass or something like that. And then we can, you know, create like a filter sweep on these partials using this same LFO. And we've already created that kind of like croaky psychedelic sound just using the parameters, my dog again, just using the parameters in the additive oscillator. So another new feature in Falcon 2 is this tape echo. And this is kind of modeled on the old Roland Space Echo, I believe. So it's got this very kind of like gritty texture to it that, you know, sounds very, very cool. It's a little bit unpredictable, so I wouldn't use it on like all of my sounds. I kind of prefer that kind of ping pong type of sound, especially for those longer delays. But for this type of psychedelic stuff, it's very, very cool. So I'm going to apply that, and I'm also going to pop a reverb on there as well. The spark verb is really cool. I'm just going to choose one of the default settings here. So there's a little bit much low end coming through there. So I want to pop on this simple 3-band EQ, turn down the gain, and then, okay, 200 Hertz, that's about right, yeah. Let's just see how this sounds now. Cool, so that's before the effects chain. Turn up all the gains there. It's a little bit soft in volume, and that's sounding pretty decent. I actually want to save that. another new feature that they've added, thankfully, that I've actually been waiting for in a plugin for a very long time. You know, there are various ways of doing this, but you know, the fact that it's kind of wrapped up very neatly inside a plugin that you can save presets and all sorts of stuff like that, you know, for me that's always a bonus. So anyway, it's the Euclidean sequences. There's two different ones that they've added, both a tonal sequencer and a drum sequencer. So of course we're going to quickly make like a lead type of sound or a sort of plucky type of sound with the additive oscillator. So let's go ahead and pick the tonal Euclidean sequencer and then drag this over into our events tab over here. I think this is in B flat minor. So I'm going to go ahead quickly and just switch that over there. And what we can do is we can draw in a note to actually trigger that sequencer to start happening. Let's draw in A sharp or B flat. We're going to start off by making a very simple arpeggiator type of pattern. So I actually want to just solo this. I've explained how a Euclidean sequencer works, so I'm not going to go too far into, you know, what exactly is going on here. I'm just going to show you how to effectively use this to create sounds in Falcon 2. So the cool thing about this is you've got this kind of very in-depth circular readout and a lot of layers to use. And it works in a kind of polyphonic manner. So you can create these kind of like chords, plucks, arps, all within the same patch, which is really, really cool. Specifically for, you know, chill out, and it works very well with like house music and techno and that kind of stuff as well. Let's set all of these, the first four, to 4 total steps, right? Like this. And 1 hit in each step. So you'll see in our little orbital thing over here, they're all hitting on the same step. So now we can offset them ever so slightly by 1, and then by 2, and then by 3. And now we've created an arpeggiator. Okay, I'm going to apply a LFO here just to create some movement over time. I'm going to set this to not re-trigger every time, and then turn it down quite low just so it doesn't apply as much modulation as that envelope that's happening right now. Okay, that's sounding okay. Let's jump back to this actual sequencer. That's what I'm supposed to be talking about anyway. So once you've punched in the actual scale, you'll notice here you've got these degrees over here. And these are which notes in the scale the this layer is triggering. So you can change these. You don't necessarily have to have it in that, upward motion. You've got, free control over which ones are being triggered at which time. So it might be a little bit confusing, all this, what does all this numbers mean? I don't really know. I just, choose it and see how it sounds. So here is where it actually starts getting a little bit interesting. When you start to alter the steps here and put them on, uneven numbers. Let's say the second row, let's put on a 3. Let's put this one on like a 7 and this one on like a 9. And you'll see here, it's already, shifted these. And the really cool thing about this particular one now is I can see that the second row and the last row, or the last one that's playing right now, are actually playing at the same time. So I can listen to it and go ahead and offset them or shift them a little bit to create a compelling pattern. So let's say, for example, move this one ahead. This is the second row. Let's set this by 1. So the next really, really cool thing that they've added is a Euclidean drum sequencer, which allows you to trigger, similarly to how the, tonal Euclidean works, but, kind of simplified more for rhythmic kind of stuff. I've gone through this before, but one of the cool things again about Falcon is it's got this slicer, which, you can throw a loop in and it'll automatically map it to a series of MIDI notes. So what we're going to do is do so, and I think it's C0, which this one starts at. So one thing that annoys me a little bit that I've picked up is that when you minimize this, maybe it's just Cubase or maybe it's just Windows, when you minimize it, it initializes all of the settings of this guy. So I'm just going to stay in Falcon as long as possible so I don't lose all my settings. But one of the really, really cool features that it does have is the ability to, generate a MIDI and then just drag it onto a channel to trigger. So once we get this all in place, let's audition this. Okay, so I lied. It's C1 that it starts at. So again, it's similar to the other one. What we can do is we can actually just use 16, and let's like offset this by 2, make it 1, offset it by 5. Okay, so one thing is sometimes you'll get those samples which are kind of off time, and what it does is it assigns each second note, so the white keys on your keyboard essentially. So you could move this one sample forward or backwards, and you're not going to use the same one as here, for example. So to make it a little bit less repetitive, what we can do is we can start playing with these numbers over here. And again, set them to stuff that's, not round numbers, just experiment with it, set them all to something slightly different and, see what happens. It's actually starting to sound like a really cool rhythm. So you've also got these accents here. What this does is this assigns the amount of accents that each of these layers has. So for example here where there's one hit, that one hit is going to be an accent. So you can say 3 hits, one of them accented. And then you can choose which one offsetted is that accented hit, if that makes sense. And then over here in this velocity window, you can set the sort of basic velocity as well as the velocity of the accented hit. That's sounding pretty awesome. I like that as is. Let's go generate and drag and drop. And drop this onto, can't see my stuff now. So drag this onto the Falcon channel like this. And it's generated us an awesome little MIDI file. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to be posting these Falcon presets to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link that's in the screen right now. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.